job as parents, and particularly parents of boys, is to keep the light in their eyes lit, to keep that fire in their belly on fire, because the world is coming for it. The world wants to extinguish that flame because, and the reason that's the case is that it's been extinguished in most people. And most people are threatened when they see somebody with their fire in their belly.
Welcome in to Menfolk Journeys, the podcast of great conversations with men. I'm your host, Chris Foster, and we're going to explore how we wear this beautiful and confusing mantle of manhood in the 21st century. Look, I get it. In public life, a lot of men are knuckleheads. But in private life, we can be thoughtful and we can be reflective if we have the right conversation, if we feel comfortable talking about our story. And we all have a great story to tell. And we can all learn from those stories. We can learn about who we've been, who we are, and who we want to be. And that's why we're going to have this conversation, so we can learn from other men just like us. And in this episode, we're going to speak with Shaun Dauson, who's trying very hard to raise his son well, and to raise his son to be a good man. We know it's not easy in today's world, so he talks about all the things that he's thinking about in being a good man himself and raising a good man in the future. Welcome in to Menfolk Journeys. Hey folks, this is Chris, and I wanted to let you know that you can support this episode. If you love these conversations and get something out of them, you can support the show by helping me with the platform fees and technologies that make this show happen. Simply go to buymeacoffee.com/menfolkjourneys. Look, I know it's a long URL, but it works. buymeacoffee.com/menfolkjourneys. Just like it sounds. You can donate $1, $5, $3, $10, whatever. You can even make it monthly. And all proceeds go to support the technologies I use to make this show happen. Thank you so much and enjoy the episode. Well, all right. Well, Shaun Dauson, welcome in.
Thank you very much, man. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Can't wait to talk with you. So tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah. So, like you said, my name is Shaun Dauson. I'm getting up there in age. I'm 51 years old, almost 52. I live. I've got a wife and 2 kids and a dog named Chicken. And so I grew up in Hollywood, up in LA, but moved around a lot when I was a kid. Lived in Dallas. Spent my high school years in Dallas. Went to college down in Austin, and kind of spent my young adult years up in Dallas, but moved to San Diego about a decade ago. And man, I haven't looked back since. I absolutely love this town.
Sure. So if I can ask, are your kids school age?
They are. My kids are 7 and 4. So my 7-year-old is going into 2nd grade, and my 4-year-old is about to start TK.
Yeah, absolutely. No, those are really interesting ages. Those are the ages where, I found that they started to become develop personhood.
Yeah.
Right. As children, and they start not only developing personalities, but leaning into their personalities and kind of figuring themselves out. And it's this beautiful pocket of time where they're not yet saddled with all the impressions and the influences and the labels and expectations about what other kids think they should be or parents think they should be and could be. They're kind of more exploring their best, purest, most authentic selves. Yet at the same time, they're interesting and they're thoughtful. They're kind of fun, right? They could talk, right? You can have conversations with them. It's this beautiful, beautiful space I found when they were that age. Are you enjoying the heck out of it?
I'm absolutely, and I'll tell you, I really recognize that that it's not very long. Like it feels, they're going to be in the house for 18 years, but really they're only going to be around a lot for the first 13 or so, and then they're not going to want to hang out with you anymore.
Yeah.
And my boy's 7. We're halfway done with
Yeah.
that.
I felt that too.
Yeah.
I'll jump in real quick because I had that exact sensation when I have 2 daughters, and at 9 and 10 years old, they still wanted to sit on my lap. They let me kind of pick them up and hug them, or they'd get on my shoulders or, climb on my back, and I could carry them around. And I was like, okay, they're only with me for maybe a fifth of their life, right? They live to be 100. They're only with me until they're 20 plus. Yeah. And out of that, half of that time, they'd want to sit on my lap and cuddle up and, be huggy. Because as soon as they're hit 10, 11, 12, that's not happening. So I was like, okay, for these first 10 years, I'm going to soak it up, right? Soak up this relationship. And, the fact that you think that, I believe you're going to be setting a really wonderful foundation for your relations with them, because you're intentional now, knowing that these are the precious years of impression.
Yeah, and it's hard to do because, it's hard. Like growing up is hard for them, and them growing up is hard for me. And it's, we've got jobs, and I got to get them to camp and sports and all this different stuff, and we're running around. Just going on about 20 minutes ago, I got a yelling match with my 4-year-old daughter because she wanted to go over to a friend's house, and she was being very demanding and very mean, and she just didn't ask in a way that made me want to say yes. And I'm trying to say yes. I really want you to do this, but you're being a jerk. Stop it. And why are you yelling? I've asked you to stop yelling, and you're yelling at me, arguing about whether or not you're yelling.
That's
and
hilarious.
I'm just getting so angry. And,
right. What's so funny is that just when I mentioned just the 2 minutes ago that they were developing their own personhood. And it's true. Sometimes your kids can be jerks, and it's like, oh man, you're being a total a-hole, right? You're such an asshat. Why are you doing that?
Yeah. The boy, so I'm just not worried about my girl. She is very fierce. She has her own way and knows what the world, like the world is going to bend itself to her will. Mm-hmm. And she, at 4 years old, this is obvious. My boy, on the other hand, he's so empathetic. He feels everything so deeply, and he's anxious. Like when I start to get animated and I start to get very frustrated, he's just like, yes, Dad, I'll do anything you need. Yes, Dad,
to calm you down.
It breaks my heart.
Yeah,
I feel
of course it does.
And I'm not even, I'm not yelling at him. I'm not, but he feels the energy coming from me.
Well, that's really astute of you, Shaun. The fact that you're already reading your children's responses to the world. What is interesting and I find curious is that your son being empathetic, maybe he's a highly sensitive person, and he reads emotions really well, and he wants to make sure that that you are, moderated, right? He wants to regulate that.
Yeah.
What's interesting about that is, in some ways, that's almost counter traditional in terms of boys and girls, right? Yeah. Where your younger daughter is, I'm not going to say aggressive, but very powerful, very strong-willed. Typically, that might be assigned to a quote-unquote masculine trait.
Yeah. She exhibits traditionally masculine traits.
So are you thinking about this in terms of saying, gosh, the traditional quote-unquote gender labels that we put on kids might not apply to my kids, right? My son needs to be nurtured as this empathetic, sensitive person. I've got to figure out how to work with him and make sure that he's set up for success as he enters into his young boyhood.
Yeah, I think, I think it's a little bit unfortunate that we have those terms, masculine and feminine, and they're so gendered, because that is a great example of a place where my daughter exhibits very, much more traditional masculine traits, and my son is probably exhibiting more traditionally feminine traits. In so many other ways, it's not like that. My daughter is very much a girl's girl. She loves the color pink. She loves to dance. She loves to sing. She's very much into, she's very girly, very, very, very girly. And my boy is very much a boy. He loves to get dirty.
It's interesting. I guess maybe a question I have for you, Shaun. I mean, you and I are of age where, that kind of label meant something, or you're being very girlish, or he's a man's man, right?
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, though, if as we understand more about personalities, we understand more about introverts, extroverts, we understand more about being a highly sensitive person or degrees of sensitivity and empathy, that I'm wondering if that's going to go away, if these gender quote unquote roles or these things about, well, boys do this and girls do this. Look, we know boys and girls are different. We don't want to take away from that, right? It's not like everyone has to be an anonymous gender, but the roles, maybe we're rethinking that in a new generation. I'm not sure. I'd love to talk with more younger people if they think that's true. I think younger men are still, especially in their 20s, and they're trying to make their way in the world. I still think they feel a lot of that quote unquote man responsibility, right? That's been passed down. But I don't know if you're younger than that. I don't know if our generation alphas and generation betas are kind of moving through the world a little bit more freely.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. There's a real power in being pigeonholed, in the sense that, okay, you're on rails, right? Like, no, you know what you're supposed to do, and that's just what you do. And then the world works out the way that it's supposed to work out if you do those things.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, I don't know, more restful, right? It's easier. It's an easier way to go through life to some degree. It's also really, really, really awful if you don't want to be on those rails, or if you don't fit.
That's right.
If you're a misfit, then life is real hard.
Or it's funny it's funny why you say that, because, or not even necessarily a misfit, but if those rails aren't right for you.
Yeah.
Right? I think that for generations we've seen, especially young boys and men, I love your analogy. I think that, or your metaphor actually, of being on a rail. I think that that's brilliant, because rails only have a track, right? And you're like, I'm on the wrong track.
Yeah.
Oh, this is really scary. How do I get off this track? It's hard to get off a track. Anybody knows anything about trains, it's on a track, right? I mean, it's on a track, and there has to be like this intentional shift in the track to move on to another track. You don't just leave a track. You can't just get up and leave a track, right? You have to transition. I think that's really interesting. That,
moreover, you are also taking on the responsibility for navigating your life.
Yeah.
Whereas it used to be the track's responsibility, and now it's yours.
That's right.
And I don't know what I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
I don't know where to go. I don't know how to navigate.
Yeah, no one's laying that. So it's interesting. I really like that metaphor, Shaun, because in the past, or at least I should say that what I can say with confidence is that my father's generation was very much track driven.
Yeah.
Tracks were laid down for my dad. Mm-hmm. In particular, I can tell you personally, because I know the story. Tracks were laid down for my dad, and he followed that track. Yeah. And part of it was great, right? Part of it he loved, and part of it was and he was on the track, and he's like, I guess this is my track. I guess I'm going in that direction, and this is my train route. But it wasn't the right track for him. Looking back now as an adult, that was not the best track for him. Yeah. He could have been and should have been on a different track.
My dad has the same story, except he jumped the rails. And so his father was a pharmacist, and he grew up on a farm in Kansas. And he was a very gifted athlete, and ended up going to college on a football scholarship when he was very young. And his mom wanted him to be a doctor, and so he went to school for pre-med. And one day, while he was studying that, and it never really resonated with him, but his mom was a very, very powerful, strong-willed woman, and you were going to do what she wanted you to do. But one day they approached him and they got him. He went to the University of Utah, and they asked him to be the announcer for the basketball game, for the University of Utah basketball game, and they were going to pay him $20 or something.
Sure.
And so he did it, and they gave him the check, and he went to go deposit the check the next day, and he handed it to the teller, and he said, "Oh, I'd like to deposit this check." And she said to him, she said, "Hey, aren't you the guy who does the basketball games for the University of Utah?" And that was like a drug for my dad. He was addicted to getting recognized and appreciated for his work. And so he dropped out of pre-med and he became a sportscaster. And he ended up actually being a very, very a world-class sportscaster. Did the Olympics and was in Hollywood in the 80s in Dallas during kind of the heyday of the Cowboys, did all their games and stuff like that. And it wasn't until his parents basically disowned him because he didn't go to med school. And finally, about 10 or 15 years into his career, he had, was working in LA, and he had risen pretty high up in, LA was the number 2 market. New York's the first, LA's the second. He was one of the main sportscasters there. He's doing the Olympics. He's doing all this stuff. And he was doing kind of some kind of special, and he invited his parents, and he sent a limo to pick him up from the airport and all this stuff. And after all this fanfare and all that, and he ended up, they watched him film this telethon or something like that. And Fred Astaire was there.
Wow.
And I think it was Fred Astaire. And my grandparents, after it was all done, said, "You know what? I guess that wasn't that bad of a choice after all." It took that much because they had grown up watching Fred Astaire.
Sure.
And I might be misremembering who it was.
No, but that's hilarious. It's an interesting thing that, so I have to ask you, right? So the story then, the family stories, right? The family legend is that your dad jumped the rails, that your dad moved off from the track. Interestingly enough, my dad was told that he was going to be a doctor as well.
Wow.
And so he did. He stayed on that track. He should have studied philosophy, poetry, literature, and history.
Yeah.
But his parents said, "That's not the plan, son. You know what the plan is, son." So he ended up going to medical school, and he ended up being a psychiatrist, which is the most intellectually leaning of all the medical fields you can get an MD for, right?
Sure.
And so, so he still, because what he was most interested in is how we as people think and why we think. And he's interested in art and, like I said, poetry and literature and art history and history and all that stuff. So he tried to shoehorn those interests into his profession. But while he did like the chemistry, he was never meant to be a quote unquote doctor, although he was a phenomenal doctor, phenomenal. But it's a funny thing because he found a way to make the track as appealing as possible. But your father jumped the track. So I have to ask.
Jumped the rails.
It jumped the rail, right? So I have to ask you, Shaun, as that becomes family lore and family legend, what lessons did that teach you as you were growing up and saw your father as a model of manhood?
It was the same way. And, what's interesting about that is my dad, because of the nature of his career, he was absent a lot. So he'd go to work at about 2:00 in the afternoon, and he would come home at 2:00 in the morning, typically. And then, he'd be sleeping a lot on the weekends, and, and his whole life really revolved around work. And but he married a woman in my mom that, man, she was incredible. And
Are they both still? Are they still alive?
No, well, so my dad is still with us, but my mom died when I was 21 years old.
Oh wow!
And it's interesting the way. I mean, there's nothing I wouldn't give to have her with us today.
Yeah.
I would love for her to meet my children, and for them to meet her in particular.
Of course, especially your daughter to meet her.
Yeah. Oh my gosh! And so we've named my daughter. Her middle name is my mom's name.
That's sweet.
And yeah, they would have loved each other, man. My mom would probably would have moved into my house to be with my daughter. But and I think because she died when I was so young, comparatively, that I'm now I recently became as old as she was when she died. And that was a shock to me because she has always been in my mind this paragon of wisdom and of comportment and of, just all good things. And what I realized is that her memory has been gilded in my mind by time. I don't remember all the bad stuff, right? I remember this idealized version of her that didn't really exist. And there's a danger in that because, that's a standard nobody can live up to. Not even her. If she were around today, I'd be disillusioned.
It's interesting. You said it doesn't exist, but it kind of does exist, right? Your memory of her is the memory you have, this idyllic mom. It's true, you don't see her as a whole person because everyone is flawed. And everyone goes through changes, right? You didn't see her as you started to get into your mid-20s and 30s and had a family of your own, and the dynamics with your wife and your mom and mother-in-law and those types of things, because those also change relationships too. And see her as she ages and the way that she would change as she aged. And I'm sorry for your loss. It was a long time ago, but I'm sure you still think about her a lot. In an idealized state, though, that's still a state, right? That's still a relationship you have with her, even though she's not the whole complete person. And I think that is a real interesting way to go through young manhood without a mother, because your basis then became just your dad in terms of a model of that older parent.
Yeah.
That is interesting without the balance.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I also discovered that my mom really helped focus my dad as well. My dad is like a racehorse without a jockey on it. And my mom was the jockey. And she would help steer him and she would help vector him in a productive direction. And without her around, he was not quite as focused. He was still amazing in a lot of ways, or still is in a lot of ways. But I think he also lacked, I think you would agree with this statement, that without her to be there as one of the forces keeping him focused, that he didn't have the kind of focus and drive and relentless excellence that he had when she was around.
That's interesting. Did you see him in terms of how he lived his life, how and his career change when she passed? Did he go through a different state of existence and energy?
I don't know if I would characterize it as a different energy or a different, kind of existence, but yeah, he lost his soulmate. And you keep going on, you keep living, but
you don't recover from that. You can't fully recover.
It's you know what it's like. It's like losing a limb.
Yeah,
like you can have a great life with one arm, but you're missing an arm.
Yeah. So, do you look then back at your parents because you said that they were soulmates? Did they have a happy marriage, and did that help you model for your marriage?
They did have a pretty happy marriage in a lot of ways. They would get in one fight per year, and the fight would be enormous.
It's time. Let's go.
Yeah. It was enormous, and it would last for about a week. My my sense, I wonder if my dad would agree with this, um, uh, with this characterization. But my sense is that my mom was way smarter than my dad,
Mm-hmm.
and my dad's no slouch. He's quite smart. But my mom was brilliant, and she I think she was impossible to fight with because
Yeah.
I think she didn't fight unless she was right. And then if you're right, then you're going to win. And my dad had trouble with that, so he would fight dirty. And the way that he would fight dirty is by not talking to my mom, which drove her crazy. And
Because
so,
this is a broadcaster who's used to talking all the time.
that's right. Yeah, that's right. And he would just give her the silent treatment. It just drove her nuts. But it was the only weapon he had.
That's hilarious. No, I think that
They had a great relationship, mostly, as far as I could see.
Uh-huh.
Right. I mean, I'm sure that there were difficulties, just like, now that I'm of that age and I have kids and I've been married now for a decade and I can see the difference between how I suspect the world views my relationship with my wife and how much of a struggle I think it is.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And,
Well, it's interesting. You said that your mom was brilliant. You clearly married a very intelligent, super successful, brilliant wife. My mom was also very well educated and very intelligent in lots of ways when it came to literature and discussions of that. So I married a woman who is definitely smarter than me. Without a doubt. There's no doubt that she's smarter than I am.
Yeah.
And I found that when we first met, I found my wife's intelligence extremely attractive. I was like, okay, you're sharp.
Count me in. Yeah.
I'm in, right? I'll hop on board. I think that actually helps so for our two daughters, modeling to them to make sure that they are with a partner who not only respects their intelligence, but really appreciates their intelligence and in fact is attracted to them because of their intelligence, to never dumb themselves down as a young girl, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure for you, the impression that I have just in our 25 minutes we've been chatting is you're modeling to your kids that, for your son, don't be afraid of finding a really smart woman or girl if that's the way the partner, I should say. And for your daughter, never dumb yourself down. Never be less than who you are to find a partner.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's certainly a principle that we have that we're striving for.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Now, with your dad, first of all, toss this idea out, and if it falls flat and off the mark, not a problem. But it might be interesting to have you and your dad on the show. That
would be great. Let's do it.
Okay.
Count me in. That would be a blast.
I think so. I would love to talk to the two of you. Especially.
He would love it too.
Excellent. All right. So A, we'll book that conversation. B, what are the types of things when your mom passed? Do you have siblings, Shaun?
Yeah, I have 3 brothers. I have 2 older brothers and 1 younger brother.
So when your mom passed, it's kind of like the Fred McMurray, My 3 Sons. It's like your dad with 3 sons, right? And suddenly it's him and your brothers all in that, that 20s-ish, late teens-ish age where you aren't fully moving up to full manhood. You're just on the cusp of starting your true manhood, right? How did that go for the 4 of you?
Yeah, there's a little bit of complexity there because my 2 older brothers are half brothers. So one of them is my mom's son from a previous marriage, and that's my oldest brother. And my older brother is my dad's son from from a previous marriage, and both of them. I mean, obviously, both of them felt like my mom was their mom, but they're also quite a, my older brother's 6 years older than me, so he was 27 when my mom died, and my oldest brother is 13 years older than me, so he was
Oh,
in
wow.
his 30s, and so I mean, they were adults,
Yeah.
definitely, and
Okay.
married with children at that time, and so the family felt like it was more my dad, and I was already out of the house as well. I had gone to college and was living on my own, and so it was really just my dad and my younger brother living in the house, and it was really hard for them.
Yeah.
I think my brother was pretty affected by that in a way that that he I don't know if he's come to terms with it yet.
Hmm.
And it's been a long time.
We'll be right back. Yeah. Yeah. It's a thing where, that kind of grief happens in different stages. But, what I find really intriguing is how those types of things changes the journey of your manhood, changes the journey of your life. But both of my folks are still alive. My dad is, yeah, kind of on his last days ish, right,
Yeah.
in terms of dementia and the like.
Mm.
But I left home when I was 18 and went to college, and it was back for a handful of months after college, and then I was gone forever.
Same here.
Poof, just gone. And because my folks divorced when I was 5, I didn't necessarily felt like when I struck out on my own, I didn't necessarily feel like I could go back. Like there wasn't like a place to go back to.
Same here. Yeah, exactly.
And so it was like, okay, now I'm going to move ahead. Very different than if you feel like you can go back, if there's a safety net that you can return to. And, I'm not saying that I felt like I was burning the ships, right? But I felt like it was my life to get started, right? Without that comfort, safety of going back. And
Yeah.
in some ways, I think that was hard, but in some ways, I found it really helpful, right? I felt like I could create autonomy. I felt like I could start my own life my way. It seems to me that you did the similar thing, right? Where you started your life like this is now the Shaun era, and this is happening.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I had, now that I think back on it, I had some good family friends. So my parents moved away. I was in Dallas my senior year of high school. They moved away, and so pretty much at that point, I was kind of on my own, and I stayed back with some family friends. And I was really fortunate to have some really great family friends that I could live with, and that could be sort of surrogate parents to me as I was coming into adulthood. And I got really, really fortunate in that respect.
That happened to a friend of mine. He's on the podcast too. His name is Mark Bylock. The same thing happened. His mom and her husband at the time moved when he was a senior in high school, and he's like, "I'm going to stay with my buddy next door," and that became now a new family, which is I think fantastic, and it really taught him that family. Well, there's no substitute for family, but you can create family with other people. Right. And you can start living with other folks and have them impress upon you different ways to live. I guess a question that I have for you is now that you're married and you're raising your own kids, do you look back and think, okay, how am I modeling my parenting skills, and how is that kind of the same way that I was modeled to from my parents? Do you see echoes and parallels?
One of the, I've started this podcast project called Raising Men.
Okay.
And one of the motivations that I had for doing that is to struggle with exactly that kind of issue. And because one of the things that is just absolutely really clear to me is that the world that my son in particular, again, I'm a lot less worried about my daughter than I am about my son for various reasons. The world that my son is graduating into, or will be graduating into, is so different from the world that I grew up in that the reflexes and those sorts of ingrained habits or the stuff that I watched are not applicable to his world. And he's got challenges that I could only imagine. I was having a conversation earlier today about pornography. And I remember when I was
that's big challenge with a capital C. Like that is like the big challenge for young men.
No question. Yeah. And so like I was recounting a story where when I was in high school, my buddies and I, we had a satellite dish, and this is the old kind of satellite dish that you had to aim at the satellite. And so, we would literally be pressing this button, scanning the sky to see if we could get 6 seconds of boob that would barely shine through the fuzz.
That is hilarious.
And the static in the television screen. And that was our experience. Or we might have a buddy that snuck out his dad's Playboy from under the bed, and we would furtively look at him behind the fence or something like that. Nowadays, you have a 15-year-old son. He's got a fire hose of porn.
Oh, it's terrible.
8 thumb taps away.
Yeah,
and it's not like, oh, here's a woman who's laying on a couch who's topless. It's like hardcore, slapping and choking and stuff.
Yeah.
And how do you deal with that? Right. Yeah. And I mean, and that's just one of the challenges. Social media, you've got gambling, you've got, and there are also challenges for girls. And they're different, and they're just, they're no easier or anything, but there's a lot of differences there.
Yeah.
And I wanted to, frankly, I wanted to have an excuse to have that conversation with people and to meet experts and to figure that stuff out. Yeah. And one of the things that there are kind of 2 really main findings that I have so far. And the first is that it's almost all modeling. Like what you say to them has no meaning whatsoever. So if you want your son to be a good man, then he needs to spend a lot of time around good men. And the man that he spends the most time around probably is you, at least in the beginning. And so you need to be a good man. Okay, well, that's one thing. The other thing that I've come away with is our job as parents, and particularly parents of boys, is to keep the light in their eyes lit, to keep that fire in their belly on fire, because the world is coming for it. The world wants to extinguish that flame and the reason that's the case is that it's been extinguished in most people. And most people are threatened when they see somebody with their fire in their belly. And my son has it, right? My son is loud and he's funny and he's a performer and he's brilliant and he's just
he's a sportscaster's grandson.
He's incredible. He's an incredible boy. I think he's smarter than I was when I was young. And the world wants to douse that flame.
That's so interesting.
It's my job to protect it.
It's your job to protect. It's interesting that you have that perspective that the world wants to douse that flame. It's a funny thing, Shaun. I don't quite know how I think about that. I'll tell you why. TikTok videos, YouTube videos, etc. If you've got some kind of presence and you want to put yourself online, you can. Mm-hmm. merits, detriments with that. Of course, the merits are that if you're good and if you're well liked, you get followers. The detriments are that you are on a soapbox and you can get tomatoes thrown at you, and you get the haters to just blast you just because, like you said, they're jealous or they want to come at anyone who seems to be successful or confident.
Yeah, they're trying to extinguish the flame.
It is interesting. Do you think that has always been that way, where the quote unquote crowd wants to extinguish the flame of the bright stars or extinguish the light of the bright stars? Or do you think that that's happening now because, although it's a cliche, they call it it's a cliche for a reason, because they say, misery loves company, right? Yeah. Suffering loves company. So if you have a lot of people who are not feeling good or feeling, very depressed and anxious and, all the stuff we know that social media does to youngsters, and then they see someone who's optimistic and bright and enthusiastic and positive, and they're like, oh, I'm going to tamp that down because I feel so bad myself. Do you think that that's happening more and more, especially with this younger generation? Do you think that it's harder for young boys in particular to be happier, to express happiness and express joy?
I think it is a tremendously difficult time to be a young man. Mm-hmm. I talked about all that, all of that stuff with the porn and the gambling, and it's just like
porn's a disaster. Now, I will say that I did talk with a guy, he's on my show, who specializes in porn addiction recovery. And he was brilliant and interesting. He's actually, he lives in Malaysia and does a lot of Buddhist meditation, and he's a Buddhist teacher as well. But he said the big challenge with porn is that it's completely accessible.
Yeah.
It's completely affordable. And it's completely anonymous.
Yeah. I mean, you're not even.
And those three things are the most powerful drivers of true deep addiction, right? If you can be an addict where it's anonymous, it's affordable, and it's accessible.
And kind of shameful, so you're not likely to admit it.
Well, so that's the thing. So then what layers on top of that is the guilt and the shame. And then also what layers on top of that, especially for young boys. As a father of young daughters, a younger daughter or young adult daughters, this drives me crazy. But it's what boys then have as their first impression of what sex could and should be, right? Which is awful. So I agree. I think that that's one of the bigger things.
Yeah, but it's not the only thing. I mean, I think that our culture is just leaving our boys behind. Like when I was young, the world was different. And it felt like it was filled with opportunity. It felt inspiring, right? It felt like it was on the upswing, and it was exhilarating. I remember thinking when I was young that the world, I could do anything.
Yeah,
I could do anything. And now it feels like the game is rigged. It feels like, like the world, the culture just doesn't care about young boys, young men.
So I'm curious where that feeling comes from. What I look at is from a data side. The data is actually very clear and it's unequivocal, and it's not a debate. Girls are graduating college at a higher rate, period. Girls are actually entering into the workforce at an equal or higher pay than boys.
Yep.
All this test scores are leaning towards girls performing better than boys. And look, we don't want to take anything away from young girls and what they're doing. We love having successful girls.
Yeah.
But one of the big challenges that then rolls out over the next X number of years or decades, and I thought that it was gosh, I can't remember the guy's name, but he did the 12 Rules for Living. Terrific book.
Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
Thank you. He said, one of the big challenges is that, women are going to look around at boys their age in their early 20s and be like, you guys are a bunch of asshats. I have no time for
think
you.
that's happening.
Yeah.
I think he's 100% right about that.
Yeah. And I've seen that, but also I've experienced it with my young daughters. They're both in their mid 20s, and they look around, they're like, oh my God, right. What happened? Right. What happened to these boys that are my age? They're a bunch of morons. Yeah. And so I guess the feeling of that is some corroborated with the data as well. And as you start to, I guess a question that I have, Shaun, is why? Why has this been happening? And has it happened for the last 10 years, 5 years, 20 years? Why do we think this is going on?
Well, I don't know for sure, but you and I, we are white men who grew up in the United States of America. We won the lottery.
Correct.
We are literally the most privileged people to exist on the face of the earth in the history of the planet. And I think that, to some extent, I think that, I certainly was born on third base, and I also felt like I hit a triple. And I also worked really, really, really hard.
Sure. All those things can be true.
All of them are true. And I think that there are a lot of people that didn't have the opportunities that I had with them, and the world awakened to that. And the world, we aspire to live in a culture where there's an even playing field. And I think that got hijacked a little bit. And what has it has turned into an us versus them mentality where in order for girls who weren't graduating at the same rate as boys to succeed, then we needed to bring the boys down. It's either girls or boys, and that's just the way it is. And the fact is that that's actually not true. All the boats can be raised, and all the boats can be lowered, or you can, prefer. And if you start playing that game of preference, then you're going to end up, if you start playing this us versus them mentality, then that's a lose-lose situation. And by the way, it is also
for everybody. It's a lose for everybody. Like you said, it's not an or, it should be an and. Because
that's right.
I guarantee you, for your son, it wasn't his fault that he was born as a young white boy in California, in the United States of America, with all the privileges inherent with that. Right. It's just how you were born.
Right.
It's an interesting thing culturally where, how we reconcile these inequities, right? I just finished reading the book James by Percival, which was brilliant. Are you familiar with the book?
I'm not.
So I think it won the Pulitzer.
Okay.
Anyway, it's an accounting of Jim from Huckleberry Finn and Huckleberry Finn's world, but it's from his perspective.
Wow.
And it's extraordinarily powerful, and makes you realize the deep tragedy, awfulness, inequity that exists and persisted. And we still as a country haven't reconciled at all with that. And I still think we're finding our way. I also think too that part of that reconciliation is, like you said, if you're, young boys shouldn't they shouldn't feel blamed for what happened and the sins that were committed 200 years ago. They're not to blame. They weren't alive back then, right? They're their own life. And so I'm wondering culturally, if as a country, and maybe this is now expanding because, so many other countries look to us.
They used to.
If there's this strange still reconciliation that's happening that we haven't figured out. And like you said, so young boys right now are feeling put upon, or they're feeling like they're not as valued because there's this strange cultural reconciliation still in process, right? It's like all of us are still being punished for the sins of previous generations that we had nothing to do with.
Well, and a lot of these kind of trying to bend the paperclip the other way are really ham-fisted and not really thought through. I mean, I think that you get these demagogues who will demagogue on reverse racism, for example. Okay, and so you have this situation where young black men are at a comparative disadvantage to young white men, no question, because of the legacy of slavery. Okay, no question. And so as a result, you help Denzel Washington's kids get into Harvard instead of, some poor white kid. And that, you have that story and you go to that poor white kid and you tell him, hey, you're getting discriminated against. That's not wrong. He is getting discriminated against, and it's not fair because he's facing inequities too. The inequities are due to the fact that he grew up poor in this country. He didn't have access to the same kind of healthcare. He didn't have access to the same kind of nutrition. He didn't have access to the same kind of school prep or
models,
or standardized testing, or any of these things. Just like the young black kid down the street, it is not substantial from his point of view. It's not that much different whether it was caused because of slavery 100 years ago or whether it was caused because of whatever his parents and grandparents dealt with. And so it's not a solution to say racism is that bad, therefore we're going to be racist. It is not a good solution because what you're doing is just creating a platter and giving it to the demagogues to say, look how they're putting upon you.
That's right. And that's a really interesting idea because, there's so much nuance, I think, to all of that, right? We are still as a country not comfortable talking about race or class or income, and the various gender, and the various inequalities that exist, that just exist. We know that they exist. Yeah. There's a beautiful book by this woman named Barbara Kingsolver called Demon Copperhead. Are you familiar with it?
I am. Yeah.
Wonderful book for our listeners. It's a David Copperfield retake, but it's set in Appalachia during the opioid crisis, which is brilliant and wonderful. And it's not wonderful in terms of happy, but wonderful in terms of its empathy and its understanding and its nuance and its thoughtfulness about describing that world. And in that world, race has very little to do with anything. It's just the economy of the area. It's the regionalness of that situation that they're all living with. Right. In my growing up years in Pittsburgh, which is where I grew up, I was growing up there in the 80s, and that's when the steel industry collapsed.
Yeah.
And my dad was he ran the drug and alcohol unit at Butler Memorial Hospital and the psychiatric ward in Butler Memorial Hospital, and Butler was a steel town. So my dad knew everybody. Like we'd walk around down in Butler and everybody knew my dad because they were being treated by him, or a family member was being treated by it, or they knew someone who was being treated by him at the hospital. He was seeing everyone. Yeah. That was this economic collapse had nothing to do with race at all. So I think that, with the prevalence of different kinds of social media and anyone kind of having a voice, there's a beautiful thing to that, but there's also a destructive thing to that too, because of the messages that these youngsters are getting. I think it is a challenging time. I think that also too, I believe that we are lacking, either through school or through discourse, the skills to with depth and feeling, have really good conversations about this, right? If it's just a snippet, if it's just 20 characters, if it's just a 15-second TikTok where someone can mouth off on a headline, there's no nuance. There's no texture to it. There's no balance of, yes, many things can be true all at once. I thought you said it very well that yes, you were born on third base. Yes, you hit a triple, but yes, you did work hard, right? All those things can be true. And so I think it's a challenge for young men now, especially to even find a way to have a conversation about these challenges, right? It can be very true that you could be a 22-year-old young white man and have challenges. And if you're a 22-year-old black man, you could say, what do you mean? I've got challenges, bro. You don't have challenges, but everybody can have challenges.
And we all have challenges, and we should all try and help each other out of them. And, we shouldn't blame the people with the challenge. I mean, why aren't we helping each other up?
Right.
And I mean, I don't know. And you see the young people, and you don't. Of course, they're going to flock to Jordan Peterson, and of course, they're going to flock to Andrew Tate, right? Because these are people who are telling them that it's good to be a boy, right? It's good. And it's the only place they're hearing that. And so,
and then the big challenge with that is someone like Jordan Peterson, whom I find is very interesting and nuanced and extremely intelligent. I've not listened to Andrew Tate at all. I've just read about Andrew Tate, so I haven't chosen to listen to Andrew Tate, right?
Yeah. Well, and the problem is what Andrew Tate has to say, about 60% of it is really good. And then, and where I differ from his point of view is like the problems I agree with, but then, his solution is, we need to subjugate women.
Right.
No, I don't know about that.
Right. That's not the right solution, guys.
It's the same us versus them thing.
Right.
Us versus them is a problem. And it is a problem philosophically, and it is a problem empirically. Us versus them leaves everyone poorer, and it leaves room for the grifters. And Andrew Tate's a grifter. That's the thing. He's there selling this thing that isn't really true, but it's enticing. And there's not really a good place for our young boys to get that message that they're good, that they are worthy and capable. They're capable of meeting life's challenges, and and this is how you do it, and they're good for doing it, and they deserve the rewards that come from doing it. Right. Nobody's telling them that. Nobody on the left is telling them that. The people on the left are telling them that they should feel guilty for being white. They should feel guilty for being boys. That's what they hear from them, that side. And so, they're going to turn to this other side. And this other side is telling them, come on over, baby. You get to be as coarse as you want. You get to, say the N word again or the R word, right? Well, where do you think that's going to lead?
Right.
Why are the people who claim to be so inclusive about everything are inclusive to everyone but them? That's what they perceive.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of them, guys.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that that's what they perceive as a message from the quote unquote left. What I thought was very interesting was, and it kind of speaks to what you were saying. I had I listened to the podcast interview that Gavin Newsom has, because he has everybody on a show. He had Rich Bannon on. He had Kirk.
Yeah,
He had everybody on, and I actually found that pretty interesting.
I think it's a smart idea.
Well, I think that it's an honest idea actually coming from him. I do think he's really curious and talking with people. He's kind of feisty too, so he can push back. But with Rich Bannon, I thought was interesting because there are a lot of things that Rich Bannon was talking about.
You mean Steve Bannon?
Steve Bannon. Thank you. Sorry. Steve Bannon. Thank you. I don't know why I said Rich, but Steve Bannon.
Steve Bannon is pretty rich, I think.
He is pretty rich. It's true. But what Steve Bannon was talking about, where he was from a perspective of political empowerment, I actually agreed with, because he was saying, look, this manufacturing base and this working class has been completely left behind.
Yep.
And I grew up in Ohio, and he was hitting all these bells. For me, growing up in Pittsburgh, I'm like, absolutely. Working class, middle class Americans are the ones that we need to be supportive of, and we need to have the correct kinds of policies and efficient policies that actually help this group out, right? I totally was on board with all of that. I'm not on board with a lot of other shit that Steve Bannon says, right? So it's nuanced.
It's not in good faith, right?
Exactly. And it's the grift, like you talked about. And so so Tim Walz was very interesting when he talked to Gavin Newsom. He said he wanted to speak to that. When he moved into and had his first national speech in the convention, he wanted to talk about young boys. He wanted to talk about helping young men. He wanted to talk about speaking to them. And they were like, fam, I don't think we're going to do that.
Exactly.
And it was one of those things where he was like, guys, this is the big miss.
Yep.
The big miss on the left, especially because, to be inclusive actually still means being inclusive of young white men, right? I mean, we're part of it too. And it's true. And I think what you said is absolutely correct, that if young men are trying to find a voice and a message that can resonate with them and make them feel comfortable and strong and confident, they're going to move someplace else. Because the message that I think we all want to tell young boys is be confident, be strong, but you can be strong without being aggressive. And you can be aggressive without being hurtful to other people. You can be aggressive in terms of a posture and in terms of moving your life forward, but that doesn't mean you have to be an a-hole, right? Right. All these things can be true.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of what you see is this performative masculinity over on that side of things. It's really unhealthy, and it's purely performative. It's not strength. It is a show of strength. It's not masculine. It is a show of masculine, it's a caricature of masculinity. Being a man means that you're on the front lines of the struggle. It means that you're a protector. You choose protection rather than persecution, right? There was a very widely publicized example recently of a UFC fighter making fun of a woman, a famous woman. A man doesn't do that.
Correct.
A man doesn't make fun of women. That's
right. And there was it is interesting because I was talking to another guy about it. His name is Mackenzie, and he said, the most masculine thing that a man can do is to make someone feel safe and comfortable.
That's right.
That is the most masculine thing you can do. Mackenzie Beebe, he was on my show, and we were talking about this idea where, I think instinctively, men feel like that we've got to feed and protect the tribe. That's part of our job, right? 100,000 years ago, we had to feed and protect the tribe. Mm-hmm. It's just that now, when you were at 15,000 BCE, feeding and protecting the tribe meant that you had a big spear, you had some bows, you had to go out, you got to get the woolly mammoth, you got to get the antelope, you got to protect against other tribes. Like that's what you had to do. Now in 2026, we don't have spears to get our food. I can call and get an Uber and get my food, right? Right. Feeding and protection is very different, but there's still an instinctive drive there. And so the question is, how do you express that protective nature, that strength? And like you said, the masculine strength is making people feel comfortable, making people feel safe, making people feel like they are protected. That's the most masculine thing you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. There's nothing less masculine than victimizing people.
Right.
And there's been a perversion, I think, in our culture where there is a segment of our society that feels like that is a show of masculinity. It's tough, right? I'm not gonna. I don't have the wimpy sensibilities that those lefty pansies have. I'm gonna whatever. I'm gonna be coarse. I'm gonna be cruel. I'm gonna be irreverent. And I really think that the the excesses of woke culture are real, and they're pervasive also. And that's not the answer, right? You need to retain your masculinity in spite of that. And
right.
you that's part of what you're protecting, right? You're protecting, I like to use this metaphor when I talk about masculinity, and it's that of a castle. And so masculinity is having a castle. And so you think about, okay, what is a castle? Well, it's got strong walls, and you protect what's inside the castle. And so if that's all you were focused on, then you would build this castle and have a very small courtyard, and it would have these really thick, really tall walls, and it would be impossible to penetrate for the barbarians coming at the gates. As you were mentioned, the barbarians coming at the gates, that's the way things that's the way things were hundreds or thousands of years ago. It's not the way things are today. Today, it's more important to have a very large courtyard. The measure of masculinity is how large the protected area you can have is. And so that means your walls aren't going to be as thick. They're not going to be as strong. That's not really what you're looking for. What you're looking for is how well can people thrive, and what kind of people thrive in my domain.
Right.
And if you look around and you're surrounded by a bunch of people that hate the world and who are constantly pissed off and who are, being assholes to people online, and that's all you have around you, I got news for you. You're not really living up to that ideal. And you're not creating a safe space for people to be themselves, to be, to figure out what they want to do in the world. And that's what our role is. That's what our role is as men in the broader community.
Yeah.
And so, like, I feel like we've lost sight of that a little bit, and not a little bit, a lot. There's a whole segment of our culture that really just revels in being a jerk. And
they think that's masculine. Yeah. So tell me, so your podcast is called Raising Men?
Yeah, Raising Men.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and it's really focused on, like I said, I've been really struggling with what it means to be a good man in our modern culture, and because that's what I'm trying to do with my son, and to try to, and just trying to suffer through the unique challenges of seeing what I can do to help my son thrive and become the best man he can be.
Well, that's beautiful. That is a worthwhile endeavor. That's a very masculine effort from my perspective. I think it's great. Shaun. So I've got a question for you then. Who is someone that you know that I don't know that I should know?
One of my closest friends lives here in San Diego with us. Is a doctor, a cardiologist by the name of Dr. Paul Tierstein, and he's one of the best men I know. And one of the things, I'll tell a story that really, I think, exemplifies who he is, and he when he was young, he grew up in kind of the 60s, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he and his brother and his dad were going to the store, and they were going to buy a treat, like an ice cream or something like that. And they saw outside the store, they saw these two hippies. And the hippies hitchhiking across the country, and they were dirty, and and so my buddy and his brother were making fun of the hippies, and they were ridiculing them, and laughing up their sleeves and stuff. And his dad took him back to the car, and they didn't get their treat. And they're like, "Hey, what's going on?" He goes, "We don't ridicule people for the way they look." And that was a lesson. I mean, my friend, who's now in his 60s, was like 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And he can recount the story as if it happened yesterday.
Right.
It really hit him hard. And when he told me the story, it hit me hard. And I watched this guy. This guy will go up to anybody, and he doesn't prejudge anybody. He finds the value in everybody he meets, and he teases it out. And he makes these people feel like they are the most important person in the world. Wonderful. He's a master at that. And he's somebody I really, really, really admire. And that's a skill I wish I had a little bit more of.
Well, that's a wonderful skill. And it's just what we were talking about. As a man, the most masculine thing you can do is helping someone feel comfortable and safe. Right?
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Good. I'd love to meet him.
Yeah. We'll make it happen.
Awesome. Well, we got 3 things. A, you and I are going to go out for coffee or drink or whatever. B, you and your dad are going to be on an episode, which will be awesome and off the hook. And then C, I'll meet Dr. Tiernick. That'd be awesome.
I would love to make that happen. Let's do it.
Well, Shaun, thank you so much. And thank you for the work you're doing with your podcast. And I think your mission and your goal is really noble and personal, because you're looking at, your own son and trying to prepare and get ahead of him moving into this space. I mean, one of the reasons why I started this podcast too was to highlight the different journeys that men have and their own visions of their own masculinity and the input that they get from other people and how they figure it out themselves, because every journey is different, right? Every man has a vision of manhood that they have when they're younger, because they see models of manhood all around them. Their models of manhood may or may not be their own father, it might be an uncle, might be someone else.
Yeah.
And their visions of success are different as they start aging, and what they think is successful maybe changes. But there are so many things that are labeled about what makes a quote unquote successful man that I think we have a hard time figuring that out. So the fact that
let me put you on the spot there for a second.
Sure.
Think of somebody from your childhood that you envision. What is an ideal masculine man in sort of your lexicon, if you think back?
Sure. Well, I think that it's different now than when I was younger.
Totally.
So when I was younger, I would see someone who had, was prosperous from a career, who, was fit, who was attractive.
Yeah.
This kind of combination of, an athlete like, maybe Bjorn Borg, because I was young, right? So an athlete that was, and a rock star and James Bond and all these things, right? I mean, you have these visions of who these men are. And so oftentimes, especially with movies, because when I was growing up, all we had were movies and television. So it was like a big screen, right? And then you have this huge vision of this person. So someone like Indiana Jones is literally larger than life, because he's 20 feet high and 10 feet tall, and he's huge, right? And he's doing all these incredible things. And so you have this big impression. As I got older, now I see one of the most successful men I've ever met is he was actually on our show. His name is Tom Demaray. And Tom is the curator, the chief paleontologist emeritus at the National History Museum down in Balboa Park in San Diego.
Yeah.
And he's had a golden life. He grew up in California, went to SDSU in the 1960s, got this job there. He's got he's been happily married. He has children. He has grandchildren. He's not the wealthiest person I know from a bank account perspective.
Yeah.
But he's, if not one of the most successful men I've ever met in my life.
Yeah.
In terms of how he's moved through the world. And so I think that, what makes a successful man as I'm getting older is comfort and confidence in yourself and who you are.
Yeah. Quiet
And,
confidence, I would definitely put as a trait.
quiet
Yeah.
confidence and the idea that you are a successful man is doing good works in the world, right? Whether that world is a small world, just a family or a handful of people, whether that world is a neighborhood, a community, whether that world is in your workplace and the relationships there. But, the most successful men are actually making the world a better place because of their presence and involvement. And it's a creative force rather than a destructive force. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah. Yeah. Builder as opposed to a breaker.
Builder as a break. That's right. Yeah. Men being builders and not breakers. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like we're losing sight of that. We're one of the reasons this stuff is happening is because our cultural institutions are breaking down, and that's a thing. Cultural institutions are rails, right? Like we were talking about before.
And they can help. They can really,
they're
really
very helpful
help.
in that. But they also kind of funnel you into a place where maybe you don't fit in, right? I mean, go ask somebody. Go ask a gay man how he would feel about going to church in the 60s, right?
Correct.
That's right. That's not the best institution for him.
That's right.
And so the nice thing about the institutions not being there is that you can make your own way in the world. But you don't. That is a responsibility as well as a privilege.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's an interesting challenge. Yeah. So somebody asked me that question not long ago. I was on a podcast and that was, they asked me who a good male role model archetype was. And I had to think about it for a while because I haven't thought about that. I don't have one in mind. And what I ended up coming up with?
Tell me.
Chuck Norris.
Well, it's so funny because he is a guy, right? So Chuck Norris is hilarious. He's become Chuck Norris now is the image we have of Chuck Norris, not Chuck Norris.
Right.
Right. The Chuck Norris image people have is the T-shirt where he's punching out a bear.
Yeah. He pushes the world down instead of pushing himself up.
Right. And so I can see that. I think one of our challenges now, Shaun, is creating that new archetype of manhood versus what we had before. I think that the archetype is a combination and a blend, right? There's no one person, right? It's for example, one of the most beautiful masculine fictional characters that I've come across is from a book called A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. Highly recommended. It's the best book I've read in the last 15 years. And this doesn't ruin anything, but the premise is that it's the Russian Revolution. He's seen of as being an aristocrat. So he's getting ready to get shot. But then they unearth this poem that he wrote, which seems like it's for the people, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, well, you wrote this poem, so clearly your heart's in the right place. So we're not going to kill you. Instead, we're going to put you in the Hotel Metropole in the middle of Moscow, and that's your prison. You just live there for the rest of your life. You can't leave.
Push.
And so it's how you make a life, right? How do you make a life in this small little area? And it's so brilliant and wonderful. And again, this doesn't ruin anything, but he's with one of the Soviet apparatchik people. Yeah. And the Soviet guy's like, okay, so tell me, and they're sitting down for dinner. He says, why are you a gentleman? Right? What makes you a gentleman and me not a gentleman? And he said, well, when we sat down for dinner, you ordered first, even though I'm your guest, and you ordered those various things. But you drove a lot of this, even though I'm your guest and you're in the superior position of where you are in the government versus me. He said, what a gentleman understands is that because they're privileged, they make other people feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Right? The gentleman in him says, I know this of me, so I've got to make sure that you are cared for, you are protected, you are acknowledged and taken care of, because socially you're in an inferior position to me. So it's my responsibility to make you feel comfortable.
Yep.
I thought that was so good and so interesting. And from a model of manhood, and you're looking for some fictional models of manhood, I can tell you Count Rostov is one of them. And so I got another guy that I'm going to talk with where it's like the Count of Monte Cristo and Count Rostov. Like, we're going to call the episode Down for the Count, because those two guys, that's a vision of manhood that I can really get on board with.
I love the vision of masculinity about being what you do with your strength.
Yes.
I love that. That is such a profound and powerful way of making it concise.
Yeah, that's beautiful. All right. Well, we're going to have another conversation face to face. We'll have a chat with your dad, and I think we should do this again. There's more to talk through.
Look forward to it, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shaun. You are my friend. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.
Well, oh my gosh, Shaun Dauson. You know, it's not an easy task to raise a young boy today. I've got 2 daughters, and now they're young adults. I have absolutely no idea what it's like, and the pressure and the thought that might go into raising a young boy who's 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. Access to pornography on their phones whenever they want. Trying to figure out, what is masculinity? All these words of toxic masculinity. Or can I just be physically male? Can I be a boy? Can I get mud in my fingernails, right? Can I play and joke around? How do you navigate this new space with expectations about what young boys and young men should be and could be? It's very complicated. So anyway, so what did I learn from Shaun? I learned that being a good man as a model for your son is the very first step in the building blocks of his manhood. If his model of manhood can be his father, and by that I mean you do right to the family, you tell the truth. You're funny, you're vulnerable, but you're also strong. You're also working on your shite so that it doesn't impact him. That's a good step forward, right? Can't we all be the best men that we can be so that our sons become the best men of us all? That's the hope. That's the goal. All right. Well, listen, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Tell other men about it. Get them to listen. Get your sons to listen too, so that they can listen to other men having conversations. Thank you so much for listening. Word bit Falared.